Hey, everybody, welcome to a new episode of Walk in Faith. I'm excited to be sitting down with Tricia Thornton, who's a professional counselor and a registered play therapist and author of Beyond Blessed Parenting, which I told you, Tricia, off camera. I read a lot, but this book, I picked it up and could not put it down. I read it all within a couple hours. It was powerful. It spoke to me in so many different levels. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. And I really appreciate those kind words. Yes, thank you for having me as a guest.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, look, I read a lot, and this book, it was interesting because there was right in the beginning, it was Saturday, and I'm like, God's like, read the book, read the book. I don't want to read the book. I want to relax. The end of the summer. I
I
mean,
want to read this book.
and I'm telling my wife I can't sit still, and she knows this. I have to constantly be moving. And right away, it talks about the importance of silence, right? And the different fears that we all
Mhm.
face. And I'm reading this going, this was what God was trying to communicate to me. And he did right through the book by reading this book about there's such power in silence.
Yeah.
But tell me now, you suffered, trauma. I think a lot of people have. So tell me a little bit about your personal journey and how you overcame your traumatic experiences.
Yeah. It started young for me. At six, even earlier than 6.5, we had a few things, but the big trauma that probably started my journey of feeling like fear had taken over me was when I was 6.5 years old and my mother's mother was there helping us as we were moving into our new home and decorating and painting it and getting it all ready. We went off to see our other grandparents in South Georgia. And while we were gone, my grandmother was there helping, and she went out to get in her car to leave, and her car rolled back over her and killed her in an instant in our driveway. And so when that happened, thank goodness I was not there. My poor mother was, but we had to come home from our visit with our other grandparents and within a few hours. And that day just really started to put a piece in my brain that my world became unpredictable. My world shifted in a way at 6.5 that it wasn't used to. And so it also ignited within me these natural fear responses that were starting to really surface and come online. And so 3.5 weeks later, we were unfortunately robbed in our home by two intruders who came into our home. And again, I didn't see them. But I wake up to a horrific scream of my mother's that I can kind of still sometimes hear in my ears. And I go to the top of the steps of my landing of the top of our steps and look down, and there is my dad standing at the door with a shotgun because he didn't know what was happening. And so he came out to be protective. And the scream, though, is what woke me up of my mom seeing the intruders exiting our home. So I woke up to police everywhere in my house, the lights on, it's in the middle of the night. And so once again, that communicated to my brain something is not safe.
Mm.
Everything I know around me doesn't feel safe. So that just got imprinted into my brain at a very young age. And then as I grew up, I learned how to cope and kind of thought I was doing really well, and I think I did. And presented some opportunities for me to grow from that. But until I was in graduate school at Denver Seminary, when I really began to realize that another piece of my world began to shatter, was when my parents got divorced. So I was out in Denver and they were getting a divorce back in my hometown. And I realized again that same unstable fear was taking over again. So when I entered into therapy for the first time, real therapy as a child, as an adult, and really began to process, I realized that fear had begun to see a little wave all the way, kind of an invisible string throughout
Mhm.
my life. And then when I wrote my first book, Blessing from Fear, that is about me over and the journey that I took as I overcame the fear and how that imprinted upon in every facet. So Beyond Blessed Parenting kind of birthed from that as well.
Wow. I mean, you've said so much, and I'm thinking,
Yeah.
I mean, there's, I guess, it's funny when you read, like I just was saying the other day, how I've been praying that God would speak to me, and I'm
Uh-huh.
listening and I'm waiting, and I realized that He's been speaking to me through these books. And I was telling my son the other day, came out of nowhere. I was telling him about some of the trauma that I went through. And this is 30 years ago in school, maybe more. Actually, no, it was probably 35 years ago, 40 years ago. And I'm telling him about how it still has an effect on me now.
Mhm.
And you mentioned too about this, the pre-disaster to the honeymoon sort of
Yeah.
period.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people don't, take whatever traumatic experience they had, they bury it and they don't deal with it. And then you see it sort of play out later on in life. And fear is one of them. So what happens like when we go through a traumatic experience, like for instance, you did, and I should have probably addressed this when I was younger. What
Mhm.
happens when we just bury it? How does that affect us in, situations, whether it's
Yeah.
family related or just in general with job or friendships and relationships?
Yeah. That's a great question. So our brains were naturally wired to connect. Our brains were naturally wired also to look for cues of safety all over the place. So if you were not feeling at that time that it was safe to address what the fear or what the big feelings were, it could have been anything. If you felt like you were in a home or a situation where you felt dismissed, not heard, not seen, then over time, our survival mode, our survival brain kind of comes up and comes online. And so, and then you're cueing and looking around, well, how do I get safe? So we naturally look to our caregivers. And so that's where attachment comes in, and the attachment styles are so important so we can latch on and realize that we are safe based on our relationship with our caregivers, primary caregivers. So if you keep stuffing it and you never ever open up that little container that holds those big feelings, or maybe you weren't allowed, maybe it wasn't safe for you to deal with those big feelings, then somehow your brain will develop a sense of, well, I better protect.
Hmm.
I will put up a wall. It naturally will go into survival mode where it will naturally protect you. We are beings who are going to be naturally protective. And on this side of heaven, we are going to be selfish and we're going to be protective of ourselves. That's how what happened in the Garden of Eden. And so when we are selfish humans and we are going to be protective of ourselves, the walls go up.
That's interesting. I keep going back to this thought, and when you said about when you were six, and like you said, we rely on our parents to protect us.
Mhm.
And you had the first traumatic experience was different, but the second one, when I'm home, especially my son, he's safe. He feels safe because I'm his father, right? And he feels safe. So, did that affect your relationship with your mom and dad and sort of that safety net that you had or you thought you had when somebody broke into your house?
Absolutely. There was I mean, I can tell you for years, I mean, literally for years, I was scared to go upstairs by myself. I wouldn't sleep in my bed. I would run into my sister's room every single night. I for a long time I bless her, I slept in her twin bed with her. And then I eventually would move over to her other twin bed, but we would put this little wicker stool between us and she would hold my hand at night. And so I just developed a sense of not feeling safe in every which way. And so for the longest time after those two tragedies, because they were so intertwined, because they happened so close together. So as a little 6.5-year-old, I couldn't distinguish the two. So for a long time, so I was in first grade, a long time I would my school would set up where I could call my mom. I would go to the office, and I remember this very vividly. I would go to the office. We had a set time where my mom, because we didn't have cell phones back then, and she would be available at, on a landline, and I would call her at home so I could hear her voice. And then I would go back to class. And so there were lots of me kind of having to learn to that I could leave home and I would be okay. Because it was a mixture of, well, if May, my grandmother passed away, then why wouldn't my mommy pass? And will those robbers come back?
Yeah.
So a tragic line that I do not think that was true, and it wasn't meant to for little ears to hear, but I overheard the officers talking with my dad, and he was trying to describe that when an intruder comes into the home and they see the owners, I don't think this is actually true, but they will return.
Mm.
And I heard that at 6.5. And so I think I literally went through my whole life waiting for the robbers to
Oh
return.
my God.
I was just waiting for them to come back. And I think that over time, I mean, that still gets me, but over time, I am able to realize, oh yeah, the robbers, I'm not running from them anymore. And so that was the healing that I really truly went through. And then through that healing birthed the first book. So this second book is really about as a parent. Not, I mean, the first book has a lot of parenting too, but this is really as a parent, how do we deal with our own trauma so then we can cue safety to our children?
Mm. Yeah, exactly. You mentioned the mirror neurons, right? And I always think
Yes.
about, do
Mhm.
not exasperate your children. And I think too, like, I mean, it's very hard being a parent.
Yeah,
And you
very.
actually, I want to go back. You have that, not go back, but you say it's not about, oh my God, I highlighted it. It's not
Perfect.
about
Perfect.
perfection, right? It's about connection.
Mhm.
And I just thought about that. But, my son is 9, right? And, we talk about, we don't want to, we want to actually, I tell my son, that we're all brothers and sisters in Christ. And I try to tell him how wonderful the world is, especially when he was younger. And then as you get a little bit older, there's like this shift that has to take place because, it's challenging. As much as I want him to be free and to do his own thing, we have to, be cautious because there are people out there that don't necessarily agree with us and are looking to take advantage or harm us in any situation. So how do we,
Mhm.
tell me about the mirror neurons. Like how do we how are we cautious about influencing our children but also keeping them safe?
Yeah, that is a big question. Okay, so mirror neurons are neurons that are in our brain. If you notice when you yawn, I will yawn. It even happens in a car. Like if you're in a car and you're driving and you look over and you see somebody yawn, you'll yawn, or you might. So that is a brain to brain connection. So it's kind of like the spidey sense. Our brain is always looking. I think of it as like I love the movie Top Gun and Maverick, and I think of that big radar screen with all of them sitting there. That's our brains. Our brains are literally cueing like a radar screen for something to latch on to be safe and to connect with. And so the mirror neurons are what allows a child to receive from you as a parent that everything is okay, everything is safe. Well, if we are not in a grounded place, not perfect, we're going to lose it. We're going to scream sometimes. We're going to not be perfect sometimes, most of the time, because we can't be. So, if we, though, are in a state of a kind of often state of dysregulation ourselves, we're going to then, our mirror neurons are going to communicate that energy to energy to our children. So they feed off of us to co regulate off of us. And so that's, it's, what is tricky is when you said, how do you balance? I go back to in scripture where it talks about how to be in the world, but not of the world. And so, how do we do that? And I think a lot of it has to do with, first of all, us being able to, one, as parents, ground ourselves, and then being able to have a bandwidth to be able to be present with our children and be attuned with them. So if we're not able, though, to be attuned within and with God, then we're not going to be able to do that with our children.
That's interesting. You're right. And I think too, like back to the scripture, right? I mean, we also don't want to be a contradiction because, if I'm saying one thing to my son, but then acting a completely different way, or I always go back to the simple thing, always return your shopping cart, right? It's those small things. Do people know that I'm a Christian or a follower of Christ by the way I carry myself? Because otherwise, I'm sending mixed signals to someone or to my son or to a stranger that, I call myself a Christian or a follower of Christ, or I call my, as a leader of the household, but then I'm sort of contradicting my beliefs, and it can create a lot of confusion in my son. And you mentioned too about when you sort of, the trauma you went through. At what point in your life did you seek help? Because I'm actually working on a documentary now about mental health, and there's a stigma surrounding mental health, and most people that struggle with whether it's depression, which I know a lot of people do, especially recently, there's been a huge increase, but addiction, loneliness, and sometimes it's too late when we find out when somebody takes their own life or they're struggling with addiction, and we had no idea, there was no red flags, we'll say. But at some point, I pray and I hope that we get to this point in society when I could ask you or a stranger, how are you doing? And you feel confident and comfortable enough to say, I'm struggling, right? I always think about that and to be present in that situation. But
Mhm.
at what point did you realize that you needed to seek some sort of help and guidance? And is there ever a point in your life where, somebody that's struggling can say, and I guess the point is it's never too late to ask for help.
Never, ever, ever too late. It's never too late to change. It's never too late to get help. There's never a case where they're too far gone. Um, there's a couple songs that come to my mind that talk about that we're never too far gone, and we're from God or from any way to return back. Um, so to answer your question, I had one other comment that I wanted to talk about first too, but to how do we recognize? I think for us as parents and just individuals, this is anybody. If you're allowing yourself to name your feelings and be able to be in a place where you can be okay to say, I feel sad, depressed, overwhelmed, angry, dismissed, whatever the feeling is, confused, whatever it is, if we can name that and we feel safe enough to do that within ourselves and maybe with a trusted friend, sometimes that we have to be able to at least do that to ourselves. Then we can begin to take the container top off and begin to dip into the different feelings. So I think it starts with us being able to recognize within ourselves what are those big feelings. And that may be very foreign because it may not have ever been allowed for you to be sad. If you grew up in a home where perfection was the answer and not connection and performance, and you were always pretty much told in non-verbal and verbal ways that the result is what matters, then you grow up with a sense of, well, then I got to perform. And crying and sadness is weak. And so I think that you have to begin to recognize what are those signs within you. I often tell parents to ask open-ended questions with their children. And one of my favorite questions is, where do you feel that big feeling in your body? So when a person is able to realize, oh, wow. And so even in client sessions, I just had a parent in here earlier today, and I said, where do you feel that in your body right now? Where are you feeling that? And she was like, I am just so tight. And I said, exactly. So when we feel that, that's your cue that your body is saying, wait, I need to shift. I need to do something to regulate within me. Another line that I want to make sure that we communicate and we know as parents, and this is so hard, is less is more. We want to so badly rush in and fix and redirect. It's just natural because it ignites a fear within us when our child is upset. So if your son comes home and he's had a negative day, and it could have been something as simple as his buddy sat with the other buddy at lunch, or the other buddy didn't give him the snack that he wanted to have. I mean, it could be big to little, bad day. Our natural response is, I don't want my child to feel that pain. I will do whatever I can possibly do to not have them feel the pain. So I'm going to rush in and make it okay for them.
I'm
It's
guilty.
sometimes, whew, it's so
I
hard
am
to
guilty.
do.
There
Oh,
was
I'm
there was
guilty.
a story last year. He's going to hear me, but somebody took his eraser,
Oh,
and
yeah.
my wife and I immediately ordered him more erasers, and because it was an easy fix, and we did it. He's a only child, so he's probably a little spoiled. But as you're telling me those stories, my mind moves quickly. I like I always think about Mary and Martha. I think I'm Martha running
Mhm.
around, but.
I recall that story in my book for
Yeah,
sure.
which is one of my favorites. One of my
Mhm.
favorite stories.
Me too.
I love it. Like I always ask, who actually my son's second book is based on Mary and Martha.
Oh, oh, I would love to read it. Yeah.
Oh, he's brilliant. Well, he's got a lot of wisdom for 9-year-old.
Mhm.
But two things. One is when you spoke about the perfection, I interviewed somebody recently, and I think they were a baseball player, but they had this relationship at home with their father that was really based on the performance. And he played baseball, and he only played because he wanted that connection to his father, and he was afraid to quit. And when he did quit, the relationship crumbled. So he went through life, with this relationship's connection, but he never really felt this true sort of identity and love. And I think about it too, even growing up, like I grew up in a strict household. My father, his family came from Italy, and sharing emotion and talking about feelings was foreign. Saying I love you was something that they just didn't do. So I understand what it's like sometimes to not be able to express yourself, and I think and I know it's extremely important. And you said something too. I just wanted to, and it'll come back to me, but it
Well,
was,
Craig, really to that, while you gather
yeah,
that
yeah.
thought, a lot of times I'll start parent sessions and I'll say, how was it when you were a little boy or a little girl and you felt sad? How was that received in your home? And if sadness was equaled weakness or something negative, then you grew up with a feeling of sadness is not okay. Because it's an issue. The word, I know I keep using it a lot, but safety. Then your brain then absorbs a message, a circuitry in your brain gets established of, okay, A plus B equals C. Crying and me getting upset equals I don't receive praise from my dad or praise from my mom or acceptance, or I feel dismissed. So why would you ever be sad again? It's not safe. So that is the train that our brains go through. So when we as parents, we're coming with all that. And then when our child has a breakdown, all that's open back up.
Like I said, I just bought my son erasers because he lost an eraser. I don't know if that's setting a good example for when he gets older to think that instantaneous is whether it's instant gratification or if something goes wrong that somebody's going to be there to fix it or correct it because that's not how life works, especially as we develop into
So
adults.
just to reassure you, it was fine that you brought that you brought
I
your
know
child
we bought it, but it wasn't one eraser, Trisha. It was like 30 erasers.
all the whole bag.
It
Yeah.
was like
So
it was
what
so many.
water under the bridge, but what could happen is you want to then figure out what language, playing out scenarios with him, getting out his little army figures or his puppets or just talking through it with him, but play out scenarios of the next time the buddy takes his erasers.
Mm.
What are you going to do? Because yes, you need to be a little cautious. You don't want to always rush in to buy him something else, but we want to teach. Okay, how can we use that as a teaching moment?
That's great.
The hard thing is, and I laugh when I say this. can we use it as a teaching moment? So if a parent is not in a place of connected within, and remember, not perfect, but somewhat self-aware, then they don't have enough in them, enough bandwidth to then not rush in to just buy the erasers. So to go and create that this is a opportunity for learning,
Mm,
it's exhausting to a parent who's not regulated. So a lot of times I'll tell a parent the telltale sign of you maybe not being in a place of balance is that you're absolutely exhausted all the time.
mm. So let
If
me
you
ask you that, because that's a great point, and I do look for life lessons. But let's say, for instance, something happens, like the eraser story. Now, do you need to, the same way you need to reprimand or correct the issue within sort of a certain time frame, can you take that life lesson and apply it later on, or does it need to be addressed immediately?
so I think a life lesson can be gleaned throughout at different times. You can pull that eraser story back out in 3 years and say, you remember when? I think it's totally fine as long as it's a positive. You're not holding that over somebody's head. That's when using a past story is damaging, but or controlling. Um, Consequence wise, natural consequences are always the best and quick kind of turnaround. However, sometimes it's hard to come up with a natural consequence for that particular action, and we have to do our best. And there are also times where you need to look at the child and you need to say, we're going to talk about this, but for right now, I would love for you to go to your room or your corner. I'm going to go to my space. We're both going to do, and this is what I'm going to do as your mom. I'm going to go and take some deep breaths. I'm going to go do a quick 5-minute yoga routine, get myself in a little better place. What are you going to do? And then we're going to come back together and we'll have this conversation. And now that conversation may have to happen the next day. And I often tell parents, put a reminder on your phone to circle back. Otherwise, your day gets going and you forget, and you're like, oh, crud, I forgot to even talk about that with them. And you kind of lose that opportunity. So, hope that addresses that little
No,
piece.
that does. So two other things. So now school's starting, right? Or even let's say in the middle of school, there's two things, two issues. One, you mentioned the amount of time, let's say that kids spend on their phones, right? Or iPads, which I should have never got my son an iPad, which was my own fault. But the excessive amount of time, but also too, like my wife and I were talking to my son about, sports. I'm not really a sports guy, but we want him to join sports. And he's got this sense about him where he can really express himself. But he got so upset over it. And he said, I just want to come home from school and focus on my schoolwork opposed to all these extra activities because we want to fill up the day, right? Sometimes it's comparison, maybe it's for whatever reason, but it wasn't a reason that was really, it wasn't necessary. So how do we balance that, I guess, is the question. And do we need to fill up our children's day with all of these extra activities?
The answer is balance. No, we do not need to fill up their day. I am a firm believer of one or two activities in a season. So I know that that sometimes is not possible. Sometimes you have a piano lesson, a ballet, and you have a sport. Well, do we have to do those every day? And sometimes it is hard. If you're on travel teams, it is really hard. So maybe we need to back up and only do one travel team, not three sports or whatever it is. I think balance is the key. Um, I'm also a big believer of what I call, and I actually do describe this in detail in the book about alone time. And that's one of my tips I give to parents is how to put in place time every day is ideal. Very rarely able to do that every day. So let's say you get 3 to 5 days out of 7. Great. That would be wonderful. And for anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes, everybody goes to their own space. And if space is hard, you just go to one corner, one corner, one corner. And you all have alone time. It doesn't have to be quiet. It just needs to be alone because kids are on all day.
Mm.
They're tired. They are so tired. And if you think about it, you and I have been able to get up and go to the restroom we want to go.
Yep.
We could even, I mean, maybe we don't, but we could not show up for the meeting. I mean, there are things that we just don't do. We can go get a snack when we want, and we can even get whatever snack we want. Kids now, I know of a couple of schools right now that even to raise their hand to go to the bathroom is difficult. Like it is getting a little trickier of the freedom that kids have. And so, and when they can. So kids are having to be in these little boxes if you're in a traditional school setting. And when they get home, they are tired and done. And they have been on all day. I have not had to once ask my teacher if I could go to the restroom. I go when I want. So, I mean, I'm not going to go in the middle of this interview, but I could go right after and not ask a soul. So, I think it's for us to have that perspective that when we are picking up our children from school or they're coming in the door from the bus, they're exhausted.
Mm.
And so, if we could build in alone time. Now, I have a couple of parents who've said, Tricia, that would be lovely. I wish that could happen. But I've got three kids at three different levels and three different activities and three different how? When can I do alone time? So we've had to be strategic. Sometimes alone time can be in a car. Why can't you have it be in a car for 15 minutes? It can be. Everybody just sits in their own little seats. It's harder, but it can be done. So we sometimes have to be flexible in the way we do alone time. But I think for your answer, can we build in downtime and me time so the child can get kind of refueled within them? And they're not always needing an electronic to have that alone time. So my alone time rule is no electronics of any sort. You can have music playing from an Alexa or something, but you can't have a device or
Mm.
TV.
No, you're right. I mean, I think about too. When my son is cranky, we'll say. I'm like, when I'm cranky or tired, what do? I grab a coffee, right? Or I can express myself. I can go to bed. But I mean, you think about the amount of pressure that these kids are under, and I'm grateful, and I think all kids and parents should, I pray that they have that communication, that open line of communication where they can express themselves. Because, we've had situations where you put him in karate, let's say, and then he had a breakdown. He'd want to be there. And I'm saying to myself, like, am I putting him in this class or this, sport for myself, or are my motives pure? Am I doing it because he truly wants to be there? And then when he's done, he's done. Why does he need or why does she need to continue if they don't want to? Because they have so much pressure in these schools. I mean, from, having three kids, it's a lot. It's a lot of work. I mean, he gets a lot of homework, a lot of reading, a lot of tests. It's a lot, and I think we need to be aware of that. And one last thing is something that you mentioned in your book too, and we know the power of vulnerability. It's a superpower, I like to call it. And a lot of people, for whatever reason, don't like to express themselves, especially when they're vulnerable. And a quick story, and I love this story. I was blessed to go to Sing Sing and speak to about 300 inmates, and a lot of them were, they were there for life. And I asked this one guy about that message, the power of vulnerability, and he got up and he said, the first day I was in jail, I started to cry, and he cried, and he said he didn't he obviously didn't want to be there, but he said when he was able to express himself and express what he was going through, he said it was like being free. And I think about that, and it's something that in culture, society, whatever, whether it's where we come from, we don't always express what we're going through. But it's books like this that reveal that. So tell me, what is the power? Is vulnerability a superpower?
Oh, 100% it's a superpower. I ask this question often in therapy. I will ask somebody and say, what does vulnerability mean to you? What's the first word that comes to your mind? And often it is weak, exposed, not protected. So, in one way, you think about a bug on the back with their little legs up in the air, they are vulnerable. I felt that as a 6.5-year-old, I was very vulnerable. So in a way, it's kind of this juxtaposition of vulnerable is exposed. And that sometimes does not feel very strong. We know in scripture, it talks about weakness is a strength, lost is a strength. We are found in, look at Amazing Grace hymn. So and I think of Martha and Mary. I mean, but yes, I love that story too because I identify with both. I'm a little probably more Martha. And so my Mary, that being Mary feels more vulnerable to me because that means that I'm quieting and I'm being still and I'm allowing myself to feel all the feels because Martha's busy. Martha's natural for me. I mean, it's natural for me to be busy. I can do that. Woo, yeah. But slowing, and I often say it's so funny because I remember when I first told my friends and family that I was going to write a book, and I remember a few of them were like, "Really? Like, you're sure?" Because I wasn't quite slow down enough to actually sit and write a book. And so, but it's been the most beautiful journey of anything I've done. So I hope that helps with the vulnerability.
No, it does, and I commend you because I know how long it takes. And me too. My mind races, and I used to feel my wife can sit and watch TV, and I used to look at her differently and say, "Oh, why? How could you do that?" Now, as I've gotten a little bit older, I envy that to be able to just sit in silence, and no matter how many times I recite, only a few things are necessary, right? There's this sense of success that comes when we're busy. I got to keep moving, which I think is the lie of the enemy, because it's really just a distraction. If I keep distracting you from what's really important, you'll never really fulfill what God has planned for your life. But I do, and I think I'm married sometimes, and definitely I'm a Martha. I definitely would have.
I embrace now more Mary than I used to, but it's not as natural. It's not as natural.
Well, Tricia, thank you so much. So tell us, how can people find out? And I advise people to read this book, and I bet you, if you pick up this book, you will, I don't want to say breeze through, but you will not put it down. And there was so much that spoke to me. It was amazing. So how can people find out more about your website or find out
Yeah.
more about some of your past books?
Yeah. So triciathornton.com. If you go to my website on the homepage, you're going to see the books that I've written. You can also go on and order through my website. You can order either of the books. You can also get them on Amazon. And I also have an ebook version and an audiobook version as well. So you
Wow.
can listen to me read it.
Actually, you know what? Listening to it in the car would actually be, that's a great
It's
idea.
it's a it's a really nice help. I love to have both. I like to have the actual physical book because in the book I happen to have a copy. I have a section at the end of every part of journal and reflection questions. So I like to physically have it, but I am all about listening to something as I'm taking walks and in the car too as well. You can also follow me on social media at triciathorntontherapy.com. And that's on Facebook or Instagram. And I post weekly videos and tips for parents that are really just quick, easy, small steps.
Well, I advise people to log on to your website and check out your social media. And I will pick up your next book as well because I enjoyed this one so much. But Tricia, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Walk in Faith. Always remember you have the ability to inspire and evangelize through words and actions. God bless you.